The story of the Baychimo begins in the early 1900s, during a time when ships were one of the main ways to move goods across long distances. The Baychimo was built in 1914 in Sweden. It was a steel cargo ship, about 230 feet long, designed to travel through icy waters. At first, the ship was called Ångermanälven and was used in trade between Sweden and Germany. After World War I, in 1921, the ship was given to the United Kingdom as part of Germany's war reparations. A few years later, it was sold to the Hudson's Bay Company, a famous trading company in Canada. The new owners renamed the ship Baychimo. The Hudson's Bay Company used the Baychimo to carry goods, supplies, and furs between trading posts in the Arctic region of northern Canada. Every summer, when the ice melted enough for ships to travel, the Baychimo sailed to remote Inuit villages and trading posts along the coast. It brought food, weapons, tools, and clothes, and it took back animal furs that would be sold in southern markets. Because the Arctic waters were dangerous and covered with ice for most of the year, the Baychimo was a strong and reliable ship that the company depended on. In October 1931, the Baychimo was on one of its regular trading trips. The ship was sailing near the Alaskan coast, in an area known for its rough weather and floating ice. The ship's captain, Cornwell Andrew, and his crew had finished their trading and were heading home with a large cargo of animal furs. But the weather turned bad very quickly. The sea froze earlier than expected, and soon the ship was trapped in thick ice near Barrow, Alaska, now called Utqiagvik. The ice surrounded the Baychimo, locking it in place so it couldn't move forward or backward. The crew waited for days, hoping the ice would melt or break so they could continue their journey. But instead, the weather grew colder, and the ice only got thicker. The Hudson's Bay Company sent airplanes to check on the ship, and eventually they decided that it was too dangerous for the crew to stay on board during the Arctic winter. The company built a temporary wooden shelter nearby on the ice so that the crew could wait safely until spring. Most of the valuable furs were moved off the ship and stored on land. After a few days, the weather worsened even more. On October 15, 1931, a strong blizzard hit the area. The crew stayed in their small shelter for several days, waiting for the storm to pass. When the snow and wind finally stopped, they looked out across the frozen sea, and the Baychimo was gone. At first, they thought the ship must have sunk under the ice. The captain was heartbroken because the Baychimo was not only valuable but also full of supplies and memories. However, a few days later, local Inuit hunters told the crew they had seen the ship drifting about 45 miles away, trapped in a different patch of ice. The crew traveled to that spot, and indeed, there was the Baychimo, still afloat, though damaged and partly frozen in place. The captain decided it was too risky to try to save the ship in such cold and dangerous conditions. The sea was freezing fast, and winter storms could easily kill anyone who stayed too long. So, on October 24, 1931, Captain Cornwell Andrew and his men abandoned the Baychimo. They took their belongings and walked across the ice back to land, where they were later rescued by airplane. The Baychimo was left behind, locked in ice, and drifting slowly with the Arctic winds. Everyone assumed that the Baychimo would eventually sink under the ice, as most ships trapped in Arctic waters do. But that didn't happen. Instead, the Baychimo survived the winter and continued to float freely once the ice began to melt. In the summer of 1932, just a few months after it was abandoned, people began to spot the Baychimo drifting near the coast of Alaska. Some thought it was a new ship, but when they got closer, they recognized it as the abandoned Hudson's Bay Company vessel. Several times, people boarded the ship, only to find it empty and deserted, yet still in surprisingly good condition. Over the next few years, the Baychimo was seen again and again in different parts of the Arctic. Sometimes it was spotted by Inuit hunters, other times by fishing boats or explorers. The ship had no crew, no captain, and no one steering it. It was moving only with the wind and ocean currents. Because it kept showing up unexpectedly and seemed to refuse to die, people began calling it the Ghost Ship of the Arctic. Many people tried to capture or tow the Baychimo, hoping to make money from it or study how it had survived so long. But every attempt failed. The Arctic is one of the harshest environments on Earth, with unpredictable weather, floating ice, and freezing water. In 1933, a group of people managed to board the Baychimo while it was trapped in ice again. They stayed on it for a few days, trying to unload valuable cargo and supplies that had been left behind. However, a violent snowstorm forced them to leave, fearing they would get stuck or killed by the cold. In another attempt, a group of Alaskan natives tried to tow the ship back to shore, but the ropes broke during bad weather. Each time someone found the Baychimo, something went wrong. A storm, thick ice, or technical problems that made it impossible to save. By the late 1930s, the Baychimo had become a legend. Newspapers and radio shows began telling stories about the mysterious ship that refused to sink. Some stories were true, based on real sightings, but others became exaggerated over time. People imagined ghostly figures on the deck or strange lights shining from the windows at night. Some even claimed the ship was cursed, but most of the sightings were likely real. Between 1931 and 1962, there were more than a dozen confirmed reports of the Baychimo being seen drifting across Arctic waters. Sometimes it was only a few miles offshore, other times it was seen far out at sea. Each time it seemed to be in worse condition, but still afloat. Because of its strange survival, sailors began to respect and fear the ship. They said it was a symbol of the Arctic's mystery and power, a reminder that humans could not fully control nature. The Baychimo had become part of Arctic folklore, joining other famous ghost ship tales like the Flying Dutchman. The last few sightings of the Baychimo came in the 1950s and 1960s. In 1955, a group of Inuit hunters saw the ship floating near the coast. It looked old and rusty, but still upright and unbroken. In 1962, the Baychimo was seen again near Point Barrow, Alaska, and again in 1969, the last confirmed sighting on record. After that, the ship seemed to vanish completely. No one knows for sure what finally happened to it. Most likely, the Baychimo eventually sank into the Arctic Ocean, perhaps after being crushed by ice or after its hull finally rusted through. However, because the Arctic is such a large and difficult place to explore, the wreck has never been found. Some people believe that parts of the ship might still be lying at the bottom of the sea, preserved in the cold water. Others think the Baychimo may have drifted far away and sunk in deep water, where no one has yet looked. Even decades after its disappearance, the Baychimo continues to fascinate researchers, adventurers, and historians. In the early 2000s, the Alaskan government announced plans to search for the ship's remains, hoping to solve the mystery once and for all. So far, though, no official expedition has found any trace of it. Modern technology, such as underwater drones and sonar scanners, might one day help locate the wreck. But the Arctic is still a tough place to explore. Its thick ice, freezing temperatures, and remote location make any search expensive and dangerous. The Baychimo's story is now often used as an example of how powerful and unpredictable nature can be. Even a strong, well-built steel ship could be at the mercy of the elements. It also shows how stories can live on long after the actual event, becoming a blend of truth and legend. Today, almost a century later, the Baychimo is remembered as one of the most famous ghost ships in history. Unlike mythical ghost ships such as the Flying Dutchman, the Baychimo was completely real. It was seen, photographed, and documented many times. What makes it mysterious is not whether it existed, but how it managed to survive for so long without sinking or being destroyed by the Arctic ice. Sailors and historians often refer to it as the ship that refused to sink. For almost 40 years, it floated freely, surviving storms, freezing temperatures, and ice that crushed other ships easily. It became a powerful symbol of endurance and mystery. In books, documentaries, and news articles, the Baychimo's story is still told as an example of a real-life maritime mystery. It reminds us that there are still things in the world we don't fully understand, and that sometimes truth can be stranger than fiction. The tale of the Baychimo is a story of human courage, natural power, and lasting mystery. It began as a simple trading voyage and ended as one of the greatest unsolved maritime stories in modern history. The ship was built to serve people, but after being abandoned, it became something else entirely. A lonely traveler of the Arctic seas. For nearly 40 years, the Baychimo drifted silently across icy waters, untouched by human hands, surviving where few things could. It became a ghost, not because it was supernatural, but because it outlived the people who made it. Its slow, aimless journey across the Arctic turned it into a legend, a reminder that sometimes even machines seem to have a spirit of their own. Today, the Baychimo remains lost beneath the waves, but its story lives on, told and retold as the Ghost Ship Baychimo, the vessel that refused to sink.